Right now, as you watch this, you are not alone. Look at your hand, your arm, your scalp, your eyelashes. There are creatures living on you. Tiny ones. Mites in your pores. Bacteria in their billions. And if you are unlucky, something bigger. Something with legs. Something that bites. A louse in your hair. A flea in your bed. A tick on your ankle. A mosquito at your ear. You feel a little itch, and your hand moves before you even think. A scratch, a slap, a flick. That reflex, that tiny flinch, is one of the oldest instincts you own. Because for almost the entire history of our species, you were never, ever alone. You were a walking, breathing, warm-blooded world, and a whole zoo of little passengers called you home. So here is the itchy, crawling, deeply uncomfortable question. How did ancient humans deal with the bugs that lived on them? No shampoo, no bug spray, no hot showers, no washing machine, no clean sheets, no pest control, just skin, hair, blood, warmth, and an endless, buzzing, biting, crawling army that wanted all five. This is the story of the oldest war humans ever fought. A war against things smaller than a grain of rice. A war we have never actually won. Let's start with the passengers. Because your ancient ancestor was not carrying one kind of bug. They were carrying a whole community, an ecosystem, a tiny, itchy nation living in the forests of their hair and the folds of their skin. Start at the top. The head louse. A little gray creature the size of a sesame seed with 6 clawed legs built for one thing, gripping a single strand of hair and never letting go. It crawls along the scalp, bites the skin, and drinks a tiny sip of blood. And then it lays eggs. The eggs are called nits, small, pale, glued so tightly to the base of the hair that you cannot just brush them off. A single female lays hundreds. In weeks, a few lice become a crawling crowd. Almost every ancient human, at some point, had a head full of them. It was simply normal. Now go lower, to the clothes, once humans had clothes. Because there is a second louse, the body louse, and it does not live on the skin at all. It lives in clothing, in the seams, in the folds. It crawls out only to feed, then retreats back into the fabric to hide and lay its eggs. And that little detail, a louse that lives in clothes, is going to become the most amazing clue in this entire story. Hold on to it, and then, lower still, the third louse, the pubic louse, the crab, squat, wide, with claws like its namesake. And here's a fact that should genuinely stop you. That louse is not really ours. Its closest relative lives on gorillas. Somewhere in the deep past, that louse jumped from gorillas to us. We do not fully know how. Sit with that for a second, and then let's move on. Quickly. But lice are only the beginning, because the ancient body was a buffet. There were fleas, tiny armored acrobats that could leap 100 times their own length, appearing from nowhere, biting a line of red dots across the skin, then vanishing before a hand could land. There were ticks, patient and horrible, latching on to an ankle or a scalp, burying their heads in the flesh, and swelling up fat and gray on stolen blood. There were mites, burrowing into the skin, causing a maddening, sleepless itch we now call scabies. There were bedbugs, hiding in the bedding and the cracks of any shelter, coming out in the dark to feed on a sleeping face. And above all, there were mosquitoes, whining in the ear at dusk, landing soft as a feather, drinking their fill and leaving behind the itch, and sometimes something far, far worse. And a heavy infestation was not just annoying. It was dangerous. Hair could mat into a solid, crawling tangle. Constant scratching tore the skin open, and open sores let in infection. Sleep, broken night after night by biting and itching, left a person exhausted, weak, and slow. Children suffered the worst, their small bodies drained by the constant feeding of 100 tiny mouths. A person covered in bites and sores was marked visibly as sick or poor or unclean long before anyone had a word for germs. The bugs did not just make life uncomfortable. They chipped away at it, quietly, every single day. This is so central to being an animal that it may have shaped our bodies. Look at yourself. Compared to almost every other mammal, you are strangely, remarkably naked. Apes are covered in fur. We are not. Why? One leading idea is that this whole war is part of the answer. Fur is a paradise for parasites. Warm, dark, sheltered, impossible to fully clean. Bare skin gives lice, fleas, and ticks nowhere to hide and lets you actually see and reach the enemy. Some scientists think our ancestors may have lost much of their body hair, in part, to shake off their passengers. If that is true, then the naked human body itself is partly a weapon in this ancient war. And then, hundreds of thousands of years later, we put clothes back on and handed the body louse a brand new home. We can't win. This was daily life, not a rare disaster. A constant background hum of tiny mouths on human skin. The ancient human woke up itching, moved through the day itching, and fell asleep itching. So let's talk about that itch, because the itch is where the whole war begins. Why does a bite itch? When a louse or a mosquito bites, it injects a little of its saliva to keep the blood flowing. Your body notices the foreign chemical and sounds an alarm. It floods the spot with histamine. The skin swells into a bump, and the nerves scream a very specific message. Something is on you. Get it off. And you scratch. The itch is not the enemy. The itch is a warning system. It is your body's ancient built-in bug alarm, evolved over millions of years to make you find the thing and remove it before it does worse. Every time you slap a mosquito without thinking, you are running software older than the human species itself. But scratching only does so much. A determined ancient human needed a real strategy. And the first, best, oldest strategy was beautifully simple. Other people. Watch a troop of monkeys or a family of chimpanzees, and you will see it constantly. One sits and another works through their fur, parting the hair, picking out the dirt, the flakes, and the bugs, one by one. We call it grooming. And it is not just about cleaning. It is glue. It calms them down. It builds trust. It says, in a language older than words, I am here. I am paying attention to you. You are safe with me. Grooming is how primates say, I care about you. And we are primates. Ancient humans did exactly the same thing. They sat in the firelight and combed through each other's hair with their fingers. A mother through a child's curls. A partner through a partner's tangles. Friends side by side, hunting for the little gray passengers, cracking the nits between their fingernails. It was practical. It kept the lice down. But it was also one of the deepest social bonds our species has. To let someone into your hair, to sit still and trust them to work over your scalp, is a profound act of intimacy. When you feel someone gently play with your hair today and your whole body relaxes, that is not random. That is 100,000 years of grooming, still wired into you. We even kept the word. When you say someone is nitpicking, you are describing exactly this. The slow, careful, one-at-a-time picking of nits out of hair. A survival chore so universal it became a metaphor. And grooming was more than affection. It was currency. In a primate group, who grooms whom is a map of the whole society. You groom the ones you trust, the ones you depend on, the ones you want on your side. Time spent picking through someone's hair is time spent saying, our bond is worth this. High-status individuals get groomed the most. Alliances are built one nit at a time. For an ancient human band, Sitting in a circle in the evening, delousing each other was social media, therapy, and diplomacy all at once. And here's a genuinely mind-bending idea. Some scientists think this is where language itself began. As human groups grew larger, there were simply too many people to physically groom them all. There are not enough hours in the day to pick through every ally's hair. So, the theory goes, we found a way to groom each other at a distance, with our voices. To soothe, to bond, to reassure, to keep track of who is friends with whom without ever touching. In other words, gossip, conversation, small talk may have started as a replacement for picking bugs out of each other's fur. Every conversation you have ever had might be an echo of two apes grooming in the shade. Fingers, though, are slow. So humans did what humans do. They made a tool. And they made it early. And they made it everywhere. The comb. Not for style. For survival. A comb with teeth set close enough to drag a louse and its eggs right off the hair shaft. Archaeologists find them again and again, in grave after grave, culture after culture. Combs of wood, of bone, of ivory, their fine teeth worn down by years of scraping tiny enemies out of human hair. And one of them carries something extraordinary. In the ancient city of Lice, archaeologists found a small ivory comb around 3,700 years old. And scratched onto it, in tiny early letters, is a sentence. One of the very first full sentences ever written in an alphabet. And what does this precious ancient inscription say? Not a prayer to a god, not the name of a king. It says roughly, "May this tusk root out the lice of the hair and the beard." The oldest sentence we can read. And it is about combing lice out of your hair. That is how central this war was. When humans first learned to write, one of the very first things they wrote down was, "Please, let this get the bugs out." Some cultures went further, all the way to the root. The ancient Egyptians, tormented by lice in the heat, simply removed the battlefield. They shaved their heads. Priests shaved their entire bodies. Bald was clean, bald was cool, and bald gave the lice nowhere to live. And then, over their smooth scalps, they wore elaborate wigs that could be taken off, cleaned, and deloused separately. A brilliant, radical solution. If the fortress keeps getting invaded, tear down the fortress and build a removable one. Others fought with chemistry, the chemistry of the natural world. Smoke, which drives insects away, so people sat close to the fire and let it soak into their hair and skin. Strong-smelling herbs and crushed plants smeared onto the body. Ash, mud, animal fat, vinegar later to loosen the glue that holds the knits. Every culture brewed its own recipe of smells and pastes. Most only half-working, all better than nothing. And when a shelter became truly unbearable, when the bedding crawled and the corners seethed, there was the oldest solution of all. You burned the old bedding, and you moved. You walked away and left the infestation behind. And this fight never stopped, not for anyone, not even the mighty. The ancient Greeks and Romans, with all their bathhouses and their scented oils, were still crawling with lice, scraping their skin with curved metal tools, and dragging fine combs through their hair. Kings had lice. Queens had lice. Emperors had lice. In the grand courts of medieval Europe, under the silk and the gold, everybody itched. There was no rank the bugs respected. A peasant and a prince, side by side, were both underneath, a warm meal. For most of history, to have a body was to share it, and no amount of power could buy you out of the oldest tax of all. Water helped, where there was water. A river, a lake, a spring. People scrubbed and rinsed and dunked their heads and combed while the hair was wet, drowning and dragging out what they could. Clothes were boiled, beaten against rocks, baked in the sun, or left out in freezing cold, anything to kill the eggs hiding in the seams. None of it was a cure. All of it brought a little relief. The war was never won. It was only ever managed, one wash, one comb, one fire at a time. Now, remember that little clue from earlier? The body louse, the one that lives in clothing, not on skin? It is time to collect on it because it leads to one of the most beautiful discoveries in all of human science. Here is the logic. Head lice live in hair. Body lice live in clothes. Which means body lice could not have existed until humans had clothes for them to live in. Before clothing, there was nowhere for that kind of louse to survive. So if scientists could figure out when the body louse split off from the head louse and became its own creature, they would know roughly when humans first started wearing clothes. Our ancestors left no receipts, but their lice did. So geneticists studied the DNA of head lice and body lice, measured how far the two had drifted apart, and worked backward to the moment they split. And the answer came out at somewhere around 100,000 years ago, and possibly much earlier. A tiny parasite, quietly telling us the birthday of the entire invention of clothing. We learned when humans got dressed by asking the bugs that live in our clothes. Nobody wrote it down. The lice remembered. And they remembered more than that. Because lice travel only by close contact, from head to head, they follow humans everywhere we go. So the family tree of human lice mirrors the family tree of humans. As our ancestors walked out of Africa and spread across the whole planet, their lice spread with them, splitting into new branches that match our own migrations. These tiny hitchhikers carry a hidden map of the entire human journey, written in their genes. We have been traveling together for so long that their history and our history are the same story. And remember that third louse, the pubic one, the crab, the one whose cousins live on gorillas? Its DNA tells a story too, and it reaches back even further millions of years, to a time when the ancestors of that louse crossed over from gorillas to us. Nobody knows exactly how, and the honest answer is a little uncomfortable, but the likeliest explanation is simply shared space. Our early ancestors sleeping in old gorilla nests, or scavenging their carcasses, close enough for a louse to make the leap. It is a strange, humbling thought. 3 little parasites riding on 3 parts of the body, and between them they preserve the story of our lost fur, our first clothes, and our deep animal past, better than almost any bone we have ever dug up. The lice are a museum, and we are the exhibit. But let's not get too sentimental about our little companions, because the bugs on the ancient body were not only itchy, some of them were killers. The deadliest creatures our species has ever faced were not lions, or bears, or wolves. They were the insects. The flea, that harmless-looking acrobat, can carry the bacteria behind the plague. And when that plague swept across the medieval world as the Black Death, it killed something like 1/3 of an entire continent in just a few years. All of it riding on the backs of fleas that rode on the backs of rats. A tiny jumping insect helped rewrite the population of the world. The body louse, the one that quietly told us the birthday of clothing, carries typhus and trench fever, diseases that have destroyed whole armies. When Napoleon marched a vast army toward Russia, it was not only the cold and the Russians that broke it. It was lice. Typhus, carried in the seams of the soldiers' filthy uniforms, tore through the ranks and killed men by the tens of thousands. More of that army may have been destroyed by a creature smaller than a grain of rice than by any enemy soldier. Again and again across history, the louse has decided the fate of wars. And the mosquito, that faint whine in the dark, carries malaria and is, by an enormous margin, the single deadliest animal to human beings in the entire history of the world. Not the shark, not the lion, not the snake, the mosquito. Some scientists estimate that mosquito-borne disease may have killed a staggering share of every human who has ever lived. More people have died from that tiny bite than from every war ever fought, combined. The ancient human, slapping at a mosquito by the fire, had no idea that this specific little sting could carry a death sentence. But their bodies knew something was wrong. That is why the itch, the disgust, the frantic swatting mattered so much. It was not fussiness, it was survival. And yet, it was not always the enemy. In a strange twist, one of these horrors could also heal. When a wound went bad and the flesh began to rot, maggots, fly larvae, would sometimes find it. Repulsive, yes. But maggots eat dead flesh and leave the living flesh alone, cleaning a wound better than the crude tools of the time ever could. Some ancient and traditional healers seem to have noticed this and used it on purpose. The same tiny creatures that could make life a misery could, now and then, save it. In the war between humans and the small things, even the enemy sometimes switched sides. So, step back and look at the whole battlefield. For hundreds of thousands of years, every single human who ever lived carried this burden. The itch was constant. The lice were normal. The fleas, the ticks, the mites, the mosquitoes were simply part of what it meant to have a body. And humans fought back with everything they had, with their fingers and their fingernails, with the love and the labor of grooming each other, with combs of bone and ivory, with smoke and herbs and shaved heads and removable wigs, with fire and with the simple decision to get up and walk away. They never won, but they endured. They coped. They kept each other, quite literally, clean. And here's the part that should stay with you. None of this ever ended. The war did not stop. You are still in it. Tonight, on your face, in the pores around your nose and your eyelashes, live tiny mites called demodex, riding along on almost every adult human on Earth, and you will never feel a thing. Head lice still march through schools every single year. The mosquito is still, right now, the deadliest animal alive. We did not win the war against the small things. We just got better weapons and quieter about it. But we also kept the best thing the war ever gave us. Because the next time someone you love runs their fingers through your hair, and you feel that deep, involuntary calm spread through your whole body, remember what you are really feeling. You are feeling the oldest medicine our species ever had. Two humans, close together, one caring for the other, keeping the little enemies at bay. We have been doing it since long before we were even fully human. And in that quiet moment, the endless, ancient, itchy war becomes something else entirely. It becomes love. Thanks for watching. If you like the questions most people are too squeamish to ask, subscribe and stick around, because next time we are digging into another strange, forgotten corner of the world of ancient humans.